There are moments in your life when the ground beneath your feet shifts. Not because the earth moved, but because your soul did. And when that happens, you don't go back. You can't. I want to share one of those moments with you, a journey that took me far beyond what I thought I knew, and led me straight to truth, to compassion, and ultimately, to faith. I remember being a young girl, sitting in front of the television, watching the news. Just like so many of us did. The images that came across that screen were powerful, and I didn't realize it then, but they were shaping something deep inside me. Every time a conflict in the Middle East came up, there would be certain words repeated again and again: terrorist, extremist, threat, and more often than not, those words were attached to Palestinians. Now, I didn't know any Palestinians. I had never traveled to Gaza or the West Bank. I had never broken bread with someone from that part of the world. But still, I carried this story, this assumption, this quiet belief that somehow there was something dangerous, even wrong, about those people over there. Not because of anything I had experienced firsthand, but because of what I had inherited. And here's the thing. The most dangerous stories aren't the ones we shout. They're the ones we whisper to ourselves and never question. I didn't question the headlines. I didn't pause to ask who was telling the story, who was missing from it, or what the cost of believing it might be. I just accepted it. The way you accept the sky is blue or the earth is round. It felt like truth, but it wasn't. You see, we all grow up with labels. Labels we don't choose. They're passed down from media, from society, from fear. And when we carry those labels unchecked, they begin to shape how we see the world, and worse, how we see each other. For me, the label was simple but deadly: Palestinians are terrorists. That sentence, 5 words, was a wall. A wall between me and understanding. Between me and compassion. Between me and the people who were living a truth far different from the one I had been taught to believe. And that's the tragedy of labels. They reduce the rich complexity of a people, a culture, a struggle, into one word. One word that erases their humanity. One word that justifies indifference. One word that makes it easier to look away when bombs fall or children cry or families flee. It wasn't until I found myself in the middle of those lives, on the ground, that I began to feel the weight of that story I had carried, not in my head, but in my heart. I remember being in a refugee camp. The air was thick with dust, the heat almost unbearable, and the homes, if you could call them that, were nothing more than patched up cinder blocks and torn tarps. And yet, as I walked through the narrow paths between homes, people smiled. Children laughed. A woman leaned out her window and offered me a glass of water. In that moment, I felt a wave of shame, not because of anything they did, but because of everything I had failed to see. I had failed to see the mother who stays up all night to protect her children from airstrikes. I had failed to see the father who walks miles just to bring back a loaf of bread. I had failed to see the teenager who dreams of becoming a doctor, even when there's no hospital left in his city. I had failed to see them as human. That's what labels do. They numb us. They strip away empathy and replace it with distance. It's so much easier to dismiss a tragedy when you believe the people living it are somehow less deserving of your tears. And let me tell you something. There's no pain like realizing you've been looking at people through a lens of fear instead of a lens of love. It hits you. It breaks you. But it also opens you. I started asking myself questions I had never dared to ask before. What if everything I had believed was wrong? What if the story I had been told was incomplete, or worse, manipulated? What if the people I had been told to fear were actually the ones I needed to learn the most from? And slowly, as I let those questions in, something shifted. It wasn't just about politics. It wasn't just about war or land or history. It was about seeing people, seeing their pain, their dignity, their faith, seeing how they continued to love, to pray, to resist despair even when the world called them monsters. I started peeling back the layers of narrative, peeling back my own assumptions. And beneath them, I found something beautiful. I found truth. I found courage. I found a level of spiritual depth and human resilience I had never encountered before. And that truth, it changed me. Because when you finally see someone, truly see them, you can't unsee it. I'll never forget the moment I stepped into her home. It wasn't really a home in the way most of us would picture it. No polished floors, no quiet hum of air conditioning, no framed family photos on the walls. The walls themselves were cracked. The lights flickered on and off, and there was barely enough room to stretch your arms without bumping into something or someone. But what struck me more than any of that was how warm it felt. Not warm from the air. It was actually freezing that day, but warm with presence, warm with spirit. She was small, older than her face let on, and had a kind of grace that didn't need to be spoken. Her name was Amira. She greeted me like I was her own daughter. She had lost one. A boy, 17. He didn't die in the way people expect when they hear about conflict. He died because he couldn't get medical care in time. The borders were closed. The permits didn't come through. And by the time help arrived, it was too late. She told me this with her hand over her heart. Not a tear in her eye. Not bitterness in her voice. Just this calm. I couldn't understand it. I was sitting there, overwhelmed with emotion, and she was the one comforting me. She offered me tea. It was sweet and hot, and her hands trembled a little as she poured it. But her smile didn't waver. I asked her how she stayed so strong. And she looked at me and said, "Because I have to. Because I still have children to feed. Because if I break, who's going to put the pieces back together?" The moment broke me open in a way nothing else ever had. I had been told stories about these people. I had seen footage that framed them as dangerous, as angry, as something to fear. But sitting across from this mother, who had lost her child and still had the strength to make tea for a stranger, I didn't see rage. I saw resilience. I didn't see violence. I saw sacred love. I visited more families, more homes just like hers. None of them looked like the stories I'd been fed. I met a father who walked 3 miles every day to find work that paid barely enough to buy rice. A teenage girl who dreamed of becoming a poet but had never left her city. Children who used bullet casings as toys. Not because they wanted to, but because that's what was available. And yet they laughed, they played. They held hands, they prayed. Everywhere I turned, I was struck by this paradox. So much hardship, and yet, so much heart. I started to feel like the one who had been blind all along. I had come expecting to see suffering, and yes, it was there. But what I didn't expect was to find such dignity. Not a dignity born out of privilege, but one that came from knowing who you are, even when the world refuses to see you clearly. I remember one man telling me, "They say we are dangerous, but look how we live. No one chooses this. We only want peace. We want to raise our children in safety. Is that dangerous?" And there was silence after he said it. The kind of silence that doesn't come from absence, but from presence, from truth landing so hard it leaves the air heavy. I carried that silence with me. Still do. There was something else I noticed. Something subtle but powerful. Gratitude. It was everywhere. In the way they passed food to one another, even when there was barely enough. In the way they spoke the name of God, even when their lives were in chaos. I had heard people say, "Alhamdulillah," before, "Praise be to God." But I had never felt it the way I did in Gaza. It wasn't just a phrase. It was an anchor. A way of surviving what should be unbearable. And I started to ask myself, what kind of faith sustains that kind of strength? What kind of belief allows a mother who has lost her son to still smile at a stranger? To still say God is good? It shook me, because I had been chasing peace in all the wrong places. I thought peace was something you found in silence, in spout retreats, in self-help books. But here, in the middle of bombed-out streets, in candlelit rooms during blackouts, in the arms of families holding each other tightly. I saw a peace I couldn't explain. And I realized something I hadn't before. These people weren't surviving in spite of their faith. They were surviving because of it. What I had been told to fear was actually the very thing that gave them life. There's a moment that stays with me. A sound, really. It was early morning, before the sun had even broken the horizon. I heard a voice drifting through the stillness, a call to prayer, soft, melodic, and full of something I couldn't name at the time. I opened my window, and this city that had known so much loss, so much struggle, was quiet, but not broken. There was something in the air that felt sacred, like the world was holding its breath in reverence. And I remember thinking, this is Islam, not the headlines, not the political commentary, not the angry faces or raised fists the media always chose to show. No, this was different. This was intimate, gentle, rooted. As the call continued, I saw people begin to stir. Men stepped outside with prayer mats tucked under their arms. Women straightened their scarves. Children, still half asleep, rubbed their eyes and followed their fathers to the mosque. I stood at that window and watched them, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of awe. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, it wasn't a display, it was just a way of life. And as I continued my journey, I kept seeing it, over and over again. Islam not as something declared, but something lived. I saw it in the way people greeted one another. With a smile, with peace. Salamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. That wasn't just a phrase, they meant it. Even in the middle of crisis, even when their lives were fractured, they were still offering peace to each other, like a gift they insisted on giving. I saw Islam in the way families sat together at sunset, breaking their fast. Dates in one hand, water in the other, and gratitude written all over their faces. These weren't meals taken for granted. These were sacred moments. Every bite, every sip, was met with thanks. Even when the meal was modest, some rice, a little bread, it was treated like a blessing. And the prayers. Oh, the prayers. I watched people pause in the middle of chaos to bow down on the earth. Right there, on sidewalks, in alleys, in fields, facing a direction they knew instinctively, hands raised, hearts open. 5 times a day. No matter what was going on. No excuses. No distractions. Just them and their creator. I had never seen such discipline that didn't come from force, but from love. I had never seen such unity without uniformity. And I had never seen faith expressed not through judgment, but through humility. One afternoon, I sat with a group of young women, their eyes bright with ideas and hope. One of them said something that struck me. She said, Islam teaches us to serve, not to dominate, to heal, not to hurt. If you want to know a Muslim, look at how they treat their neighbor. And I thought, what if the whole world lived like that? These were not people trying to convert me. No one handed me a book or recited a lecture. They didn't need to, because everything they did, how they gave, how they forgave, how they kept walking through fire without becoming bitter. That was the sermon. They had every reason to be hardened, to be angry. But instead, I saw generosity. I saw patience. I saw hospitality so deep it humbled me. People who had nothing still gave. People who were tired still smiled. People who had lost everything still trusted in something greater. And slowly something shifted in me. I stopped observing and started absorbing. I realized this wasn't just a religion of rituals. It was a rhythm of heart and spirit. A way of aligning yourself not just with God, but with goodness, with purpose, with peace. The more time I spent in that space, the more I found myself drawn to it. Not by pressure, not by persuasion, but by presence. There was something magnetic about the way they lived. Something that pulled at the deepest part of me and whispered, this is what you've been searching for. I had spent years reading self-help books, going on spiritual retreats, meditating in silence, trying to find a center. But here it was, in the middle of a war-torn city, in the middle of people who had nothing but faith. And it was more powerful than anything I'd ever known, because it wasn't about escaping reality. It was about meeting reality with grace, with prayer, with trust. I saw Islam not as a religion of rules, but a religion of remembrance, a way of staying awake, staying aware of yourself, of others, of God, even in suffering, even in joy. And I knew then, with no one telling me, with no one guiding me, that something had changed. I hadn't just seen Islam, I had felt it, and I couldn't unfeel it. I used to think faith was something you inherited, something passed down through blood, or tradition, or geography. I believed it was tied to identity, to culture, to family dinners and familiar holidays. Something fixed, something that came with a name tag you didn't get to choose. But life has a way of unraveling you so that you can be rewoven into something truer. After everything I had seen, after sitting with mothers who had lost their children, after watching families bow their heads in prayer, with bombs still echoing in the distance, after witnessing kindness from people who had every reason to be bitter, I found myself standing at the edge of something I couldn't explain. And I had to ask myself, what is this peace I keep feeling? Where is it coming from? Why is it showing up here, in the middle of so much pain, while I spent so many years chasing it and never finding it? The answer came quietly, not as a revelation but as a realization. I hadn't just observed Islam. I had walked through it, step by step, moment by moment, and what I found wasn't fear or hatred or extremism. What I found was beauty, stillness, devotion. What I found was truth, and I want to be honest. I didn't become a Muslim overnight. I didn't wake up one day and declare a new identity. It was slower than that, quieter. It started as a question, then it became a pull, and eventually, it became a home I didn't know I had been missing. There's something powerful about choosing a faith instead of inheriting it. When you choose it, you don't do it for show. You don't do it to please your family or your community. You do it because it feels like the most honest thing you've ever done. You do it because everything in you finally aligns. I didn't become a Muslim because someone handed me a pamphlet or argued theology with me. I didn't do it out of rebellion or guilt. I became a Muslim because I saw a people whose hearts were tethered to something I could feel but had never named. I saw men who had nothing but still gave with both hands. I saw women who had every reason to be broken, but stood taller than anyone I'd ever met. I saw children who recited prayers with smiles on their faces and hope in their eyes. And I thought to myself, if this is what faith looks like, then this is what I want to belong to. I remember the first time I whispered the words of the Shahada, La ilaha illa Allah, Muhammadan Rasul Allah. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. My voice trembled, my heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of it, the truth of it. And as I said those words, I didn't feel like I was becoming someone new. I felt like I was returning to who I had always been. It wasn't about leaving something behind. It was about stepping into something deeper, something fuller. I wasn't changing. People often ask me, what made you convert? And I always tell them, it wasn't an idea. It was a people. It was the way they lived, the way they loved, the way they endured, the way they remembered God, not just in ritual, but in every breath, every bite, every moment of joy and every moment of pain. That kind of faith is contagious. It moves through you. And once it does, there's no going back. And let me say this clearly, Islam did not erase who I was. It expanded me. It deepened my compassion, sharpened my purpose, widened my lens. It didn't ask me to forget where I came from. It asked me to remember who I am. This journey wasn't about religion in the way the world often talks about religion. This was about surrender. Surrendering the ego. Surrendering control. Surrendering to something higher, more loving, more merciful than I had ever known. That's what Islam means. Surrender. And not the kind of surrender that weakens you. The kind that makes you whole. I look back now at the person I was. Curious, but cautious, searching, but unsure. And I think of all the people I met along the way who, without even knowing it, showed me the way home. They didn't have power. They didn't have platforms, but they had faith. And in that faith, I found something I had been aching for all my life. So no, I didn't become a Muslim because I needed answers. I became a Muslim because I found truth. And the truth, once you see it, once you feel it, becomes impossible to ignore. So yes, they called Palestinians terrorists. But what I saw made me a Muslim. Because sometimes, the most radical thing you can do in this world is to see people clearly. And once you do, you can never go back. Thank you.